So the idea was that we would start the afternoon with meditation. I think the practical reality is the main thing to eat in this neighborhood is burritos. And something more lively than sitting quietly with our eyes closed after the amount of carbohydrates I at least have just consumed. Seems like it might be a decent idea. It looked like when we were doing question and answers, there were a bunch more questions we hadn't got to. Perhaps some others have percolated. When I'm teaching retreats, I always give this little speech before the Q&A, which I forgot to give today. The little speech is the anti-filibuster rule. Probably all familiar with the concept of the filibuster. It's when you talk indefinitely. So during the Q&A, if you could keep your question to a question, it should be about one sentence. Semicolons are arguably cheating. Your voice has to go up at the end, and other such indicators. It seems like, especially as the day goes on and we've all been getting more into our heads. I have a question. Yeah, I was born on a dark and stormy night. My relationship with my mother has never really been so... Michael and I are excited to talk about whatever y'all would like to hear about if anybody wants to get us started.
Well, we're going to hand the microphone back and forth.
We're going to hand the microphone back and forth. Yeah, sure. And if you wouldn't mind saying your name.
Yeah, that's Karen from Simple Habit.
Sure, thanks. No, no longer from Simple Habit.
Yeah.
But I had a question if you could elaborate on the idea of the dark night of the soul or the shitty afternoon. What is it, just the entrance and the emergence, and what happens?
Oh, you want it?
We have the good start.
Okay.
The good story. I'll just start.
Is this on? Yes. So, dark night of the soul is a phrase from Christian mysticism, right? It's from Juan de la Cruz. So, he's writing about what can happen in super deep mystical experience when the mystical experience or the meditation experience starts getting strong enough that instead of just removing the stuff you don't like, remember everything's disappearing, dissolving and going away, and when stuff you don't like is dissolving and going away, it's great. But at a certain point, stuff you really like starts dissolving and going away too, because it's on the way to yourself dissolving and going away. And when that starts happening, it can be extremely, extremely uncomfortable. And it might not be so obvious that that's what's going on, but stuff gets very complex, and exactly when you're supposed to loosen up even more and relax even more, you clamp down. And so, as I've heard Tucker Peck put it before, and I've stolen this metaphor since, the meditation is like banging your head against the table till you let go of the thing it's trying to dissolve. And so that can go on for a long, shitty afternoon or like years, depending, because sometimes when people encounter that, they stop practicing because it's just too, and so then it just continues. So that's the basic idea. For some people, it's really easy and they don't seem to have anything you would recognize as a dark night. For other people, it really is recognizably awful.
So there's not any one map that I think everybody follows. One relatively common way that meditation will manifest is you start doing it and it feels good and it's feeling a little better, and then it feels amazing. Like the reason some people aren't happy is they're not meditating. Meditation gives you positive emotions all the time and everybody should do it and you should tell them. The lesson that you're learning is the way to solve negative emotions is to get rid of them through meditation. And this hits an absolute dead end, sometimes called the knowledge of what is and is not the path. That what looked like the path, get really, really happy and stay there, is not the path. In fact, it's not any path at all. And you hit this wall. And this is when you start learning the real skill of the Dharma, which is basically the opposite of the skill you had before. The skill you'd been developing is get positive feelings. The real skill of the Dharma is positive and negative feelings arise and pass away outside of your control. Don't stress so much. I like to say that all spiritual paths can be summarized with the phrase, just let go. If you could follow that direction, I would venture everybody would be enlightened. The point of complex spiritual paths is because that direction is too hard to just follow volitionally, there's all sorts of tricks for how you might surrender to God as a way of just let go. Ignore everything and focus on your breath as a way of just let go. Watch things instead of identifying with them, and so on. I would think of every spiritual path as a trick to just let go. But yeah, as Michael says, just letting go doesn't feel especially good. It's just not what we were built to do. And this is the beating of your head, is meditation used to work so well to make you happy, and you just keep trying to do the thing you used to do. Chula Dasa was my teacher for quite a few years, and I remember the first conversation we had about Dharma. He said, what's going on in your path? And I said, I used to be enlightened, and now I'm not anymore. I was just so happy, and I was meditating so well, and then it didn't work anymore. I was trying to get back to where I used to be, whereas the path through is the opposite. Let go, let go, let go, let go, let go. Stop controlling, stop controlling. If it's bad, let it be bad. Victoria?
Thank you. Could you comment a little on the desire for sensual pleasures, like that delicious lunch we just had, and kind of like the place for that, in what can sometimes feel like a very aesthetic kind of non-practice.
Yeah. So there's a traditional Buddhist teaching that there's 3 ways that we deal with the inherent suffering of reality, that everybody does all 3, but that each of us, we tend to have our flavor. So one type, I bring this up just because I'm very strongly the first type, which is craving. If you ask me why I'm not happy, I'm going to tell you about like awesome things I haven't done yet, but I'll get them later, beautiful people I have yet to hook up with, ways I'm going to become even more awesome than I currently am, and so on. I just stare at the positive, and I see the beautiful where there is none to be found. The opposite is the craving, the aversive type, which is you say, hey, why aren't you perfectly happy? I hate this thing, and that thing's stupid, and the fucking government. Somebody who is seeing the ugly everywhere. And seeing the ugly even where there is no ugly. The problem in life is there's too much ugly, and the solution is to get rid of it. The third is the delusive type. It involves moving away from experience. So the more stressed you become, the more confused you become. This is, as with all delusion, something easier to recognize in someone else than it is to recognize in yourself. Sensory pleasure is great. I mean, I think the ascetic Dharma teacher isn't something we see very often in the West. I think very few Western Dharma teachers are intentionally celibate. The teachers always seem to go to restaurants when it's lunchtime. Most Western Dharma teachers are living in the world. I could certainly see why, I do see in my own experience why this is an impediment to progress. You know, when I say there's no one I know well enough to confirm they're really at these high levels of enlightenment with no suffering. If I had to say why aren't I there, it seems like you can't date that way, you know? When the waiter asks if you'd like chocolate or vanilla, you gotta say something. All flavors are one flavor, the taste of freedom. But sir, I have to bring you something, sir. Need to make a living. So the Buddha talks a lot about the danger of sensory pleasures. The Buddha is not a fun guy. There's one time where the Buddha seems to have fun. It's pouring, and he tells all the monks, it's never going to rain this hard again. Everybody get naked and go run around in the rain. And the result of this was this wealthy woman thought it was so disgusting, was a commandment that no monk would ever be naked again, even when showering. But this is neither here nor there. The record we have of the Buddha is not as a terribly fun guy. I think the answer to that question is the suffering comes from the delusion of mixing up inside and outside. The burrito has a particular taste to it. That is outside, right? Some burritos are better than other burritos, and I do actually think that the flavor is a quality of the burrito. The enjoyment is not a quality of the burrito, that's a mental quality. So I would say it depends how you respond to the craving. We're often using sensory cravings to fill holes in ourselves that are not filled by those cravings, right? We are writing into the sensory craving things that are not there. And this leads to, in the 12-link formulation, birth and death, birth and death, birth and death. So before lunch, it's like, I'm really hungry. Ooh, I want a burrito, pinto beans. I love those things, right? And it feels like there's gonna be some happiness. And then after lunch, you're like, maybe I'm never gonna eat again. I feel terrible. Why was there so much rice on that? And now there's some new craving, right? The suffering before lunch was from being hungry, the suffering after lunch was from being full, and so on. The problem of this dukkha is tanha, the Four Noble Truth formulation. It's craving and aversion, it's mixing up mental desires with things in the outside. And this is what causes suffering. So how do you relate to them? I don't think there's a general right for everybody answer to that question. Somebody who is tending to be aversive, the advice would often be engage in sensory pleasure, you know? Do your retreat somewhere really beautiful. You're missing the allure of the world. Somebody like me, I did a month retreat in like a trailer with busted out windows, there were spiders in it. I just wanted the ugliest. Because if I'm meditating on the beach, it's like, who needs meditation? The beach is so beautiful. If you spend enough time meditating, there's this cycle a lot of people go through where the pleasures stop being alluring. It starts really feeling like chocolate and vanilla are the same thing. You know, in that case, I'll often direct people towards sensory pleasure. So I guess it depends on where you are. If you're trying to see craving more clearly, just like the Buddha says, seclusion from sensory pleasure. See it from a distance, and then you can see it more clearly, more holistically. If the world is stupid, the only point of existence is escape, you're really missing out that one day you won't have a tongue anymore, and it's unclear if you get to taste ice cream once you don't have a body, enjoying what the body lets you do if you hang out with these like realized masters, one commonality I see with just about everybody is this childlike explosion of joy in response to tiny little sensory pleasures. Watching Chuladasa eat ice cream is so delightful. This guy Eric I was talking about earlier, he and I are both super into the Muppet Show, and he's pretty old man. He'll like jump up and down when there's an opportunity to watch the Muppet Show. It seems like when you clear out the issues of your own suffering, these like simple enjoyment of sensory pleasures is one of the delightful things that's left.
Can you speak to, on the path of awakening, an obstacle that emerges for an otherwise well-adjusted person that is the fear of going insane, fear of being crazy?
Why don't you go for the crazy question?
Okay, I'll give it back to you when we get the next drug one. So the question, and what's your name?
Daniel.
The question was an obstacle where a non-crazy person is afraid they're going crazy. I would actually venture that there is no true path that does not crash into that obstacle. You are going crazy. A state of egolessness and a state of insanity are really a hair's breadth separate from one another. I think it would be like this. Probably most people have done walking meditation, right? You know that feeling where you're doing walking meditation and you almost fall down? Have you guys seen that, where it's actually hard to balance in walking meditation? Like, what the hell's going on with that, right? I can walk at any speed I want when it's not meditation. Why is it hard to stand up? The answer is the conscious mind doesn't know how to walk. When you use the ego to take over the process of walking, it doesn't know how to do it, and it's going to fall over. There's all these pretty complicated center of gravity calculations that your conscious mind is not very good at making. Because the ego feels like you, and it often feels like the only you, right? The wall behind me doesn't feel like it has the slightest thing to do with you, even though the only reason you know there's a wall behind me is it's appearing in your sensory experience. So it feels as though the ego suppressing the parts of you that want to run naked through the streets, which maybe in San Francisco you can do, but in most places that would be a sign of insanity. Here it seems like, I went to the Folsom Street Fair one time. It seems like it may be a sign of normalcy. But you get the metaphor. The part of you that wants to tell your relatives how much you hate them and run naked through the streets and stop going to work, and all of these impulses feel like if you, the ego, me, the guy in the driver's seat here, is not consciously suppressing it, what would happen? And for most people, the answer is nothing. The same way that when you stop thinking about walking, you actually walk quite a bit better. If you're playing music or playing sports, it's the same thing, right? When you stop focusing on what you're doing, you're much more successful. For most people, allowing the ego to dissolve and feeling like nobody is suppressing the parts of you that need to be suppressed, they remain suppressed anyways. The warning labels for this morning were that this is not the case for everybody. This is also why I think of the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. You probably know a bunch of fellow meditators, you probably met some teachers, and some of them seem a little insane, but most of them don't. It seems like it must be possible to keep doing meditation and not become insane. But that feeling of losing the most important thing there is, sanity, or it's similar to the feeling of dissolution, like you and or reality may just blink out of existence if you don't keep creating it. Those kinds of feelings I would think are almost unavoidable as you get closer to stream entry and the ego starts decaying.
My name is Derek. I had a question. I have this experience of meditating, sort of reducing my need for sleep, which kind of concerned me enough that I kind of stopped meditating for a while. Could you speak on that?
Sorry, I've been going for a while, but I should probably take a sleep on, right?
Yep.
I have a PhD in sleep and meditation. You have come to the right place. I also now have an online class at drugfreesleep.com. How good is that URL? Drugfreesleep.com. No, I've never seen this man before in my life. Oddly, that's true. I actually have never met him before. So there is not scientific documentation, actually, but a lot of historical anecdotal data that meditation decreases need for sleep. I have some pet theories about why that might be the case, but it happens to, it is the case. Meditation also does this really funny thing to your sleep, where the more you practice, the better you say you sleep on every conceivable measure of which you could say you sleep. And oddly, if we bring you into the lab and plug you in and get objective measures of your sleep quality, the worse you sleep on every conceivable measure of worse. What's happening is large amounts of meditation are causing your brain to literally become more awake 24 hours a day. I lived for a summer with this scientist named Willoughby Britton, and she had a paper called "Awakening is Not a Metaphor," about how your brain is literally more awake, and it's why the objective measures of sleep look worse. There's a few things that correlate with meditation that also correlate with age, and so it's hard to extract the two. I've heard a few people say when you get very, very enlightened, your memory starts going. It's like, yeah, okay, but you're 70 by then. Like, memory goes with age. How do you pull these? I know very few people over 60 who say their memory is the same as it was when they were 30. And another thing that changes with age is sleep need. Babies can sleep like 12 hours a day or something. By the time we're in our 80s and 90s, we're often sleeping like 4.5 hours a night, feeling insufficient. The basic answer to all of this complexity is I actually wouldn't judge your sleep quality by your sleep. I would judge your sleep quality by your wake. If you are not tired during the day and you're able to sleep less, that's pretty cool. Now you have more time for whatever it is you'd like to do. Are you finding that it's impairing your sleep and then you're not tired, or that you're sleeping less but your day's fine?
So when it was happening, it doesn't happen now, but like you stopped for a while. No, I was feeling more awake during the day and just staying up like longer. So
Yeah, that's pretty normal. Like on long retreats, for whatever reason, I don't get this and would love it, but on, most people on long retreats will start sleeping very little and feel fine. There's Zen retreats where you'll meditate all day, all night, all day, and people actually do that. Okay, so yeah, I would just think of it as a positive side effect unless you start getting sleepy. If you Google, it's not nearly as easy to remember as drugfreesleep.com, but it's called the psychomotor vigilance test. 3 words, psychomotor vigilance test. It's a 3-minute objective test you can take for free online that will give you a sense of how alert you are. Like if you're driving your car fine, if you can read a book and you're not drifting or forgetting what you're reading, different measures of like semi-objective measures of alertness like that. If that all looks good, I think you're doing it right.
I think at this point we should switch from questions to practice. End of Q&A for the moment. So earlier we were working on contacting emotions, just knowing what you're feeling. The really interesting thing about that is, number one, having taught this for a really long time, it would always shock me how a lot of people would report not knowing what they're feeling at all. Like, well, I know I'm feeling something, but I don't know what it is. And so a really fascinating part of that work is that, you start to know what you're feeling after a while, and that turns out to be kind of important. Rather than just, I'm really, riled up in some way, being able to say, oh, actually, there's some anger in there, there's some shame, there's some fear, it's mixed in with some, of this or that other thing. Now I've got a more of a handle on it, right? And there's some interesting research that shows, actually quite a bit of research, that when you do make the label, when you make this verbal description of what you're feeling, it actually changes your mind state, because the emotions are coming from like this very ancient part of the brain, hypothalamus region, all that. It's very primal, right? But to analyze what you're feeling and make the words, that's what makes people not just monkeys is the prefrontal cortex, right? We've got this added on processor at the very, very front of our brain, like behind your forehead. Try not to ever hit your forehead. Right behind there is the thing that is most useful to, like being able to control feelings and so on, right? It's a hugely crucial part of your brain. And it turns out that if you're just having feelings and they're staying kind of semi-conscious and primal like that, it can be hard to regulate. But just by naming them, it's bringing on the prefrontal cortex, right? It's using this executive function and to make the word. All you're doing is booting up that part of your brain because you're trying to make a word. But actually, when that part, is more online, having made this word, it now is available to regulate the emotion, right? So just naming emotions is actually very helpful. You see people teach it to little kids, right? Use your words or whatever, because actually it's teaching them to regulate. So that turns out to be super useful. Plus, you can go a long time without actually knowing what you're feeling. I remember one time I was in a Shinzen retreat, this is a long, long, long time ago, and I just learned this technique. Simply, name what you're feeling. So sitting there day after day, naming what I'm feeling, I'm naming what I'm feeling, I'm naming what I'm feeling. And I started to notice this weird thing, which was like, it just keeps being sorrow. Like hour after hour, I'm sad, I'm really fucking sad. And at the end of the retreat, I remember saying to the person I went to the retreat with, I was like, I'm depressed. And I realized I've been depressed for like a year, and I didn't know it. And this person knew me pretty well. They were like, I can't fucking believe you just saw that. Like everyone else knows, but you don't see it until you see it. And actually sometimes just sitting there and observing and observing and observing, it helps you come out of, let's say you're like the fish in the water, you can eventually actually see the water. And that turns out to be a big deal. So we're gonna do sort of the other side of this now, which is thoughts. So normally when, in a lot of mindfulness meditation, people think it's only the body, only body sensations, maybe emotional sensations. But really, if we have a full spectrum mindfulness meditation, we do meditation on thinking. And for a lot of people who have done a little bit of meditation on thinking, the usual thing is like kind of dismiss it. Oh, yep, that's a thought. Oh, yep, that's a thought. But that's not what I mean in this case. I mean like actively contacting the experience of thinking. If we were doing this again in sort of a meditative liberation direction, we'd be contacting that so clearly and completely it would start to dissolve and break up impermanence and no self and all that. Having your mind real time as each thought comes up, it's just completely blowing away in the wind, blowing away in the wind, blowing away in the wind. That's actually ridiculously pleasant. Doesn't matter, you don't even know what the thoughts are, and it doesn't matter how much there are, how many thoughts there are, it's just like this natural fountain of experience that just feels good. Because you're experiencing the emptiness quality of thought, so it's liberating. But notice that makes it really, really hard to know what you're thinking. Right? It makes it literally impossible to know what you're thinking because the knowing what you're thinking part is the content. And so, again, we're going to do that same move of backing away from the sort of microscope of emptiness into where the content represents itself. We kind of go from the Einsteinian quantum realm back to just like Newtonian billiard ball zone where it's a thing and you can notice its content. So we're going to do that with thoughts, and we're going to actually do a analytical type meditation. So it's actually one of the translations, everyone always translates vipassana or sati as insight, but it can also mean analysis. So we're going to do analysis, meditation on thinking. The basic idea is simple, and we're going to start right away, which is a thought comes up, you contact the content, and I want you to notice a couple things about it. I want you to notice if it is, to your, just in a very simple way, do you think it is true? Do you think it's extreme or not? Is it real black and white? Is it real global? Everything this, everything that, totally this, totally that. So is it extreme or not? Is it about me or not? It's very important. Is it just a thought about the burritos, or is it a thought about your, what I'm like? So, is it black or white or extreme? Is it about me? What was the first one?
Is it true?
Is it true? The reason I can't even remember, because I could go, the list could be like 18 qualities long, right? But let's just see, is it true? Is it extreme? Is it about me? We'll just add the Quaker one. Is it kind? So just in a very gentle way, look at the thought like that, and then relax back into your breathing or whatever until the next really clear thought arises. Then sit with that and kind of work with it. So let's begin. And of course, thoughts happen much quicker than this, so you're in a very artificial way. Once a thought, naturally, easily arises, then in a very artificial way you are sort of stopping time and just analyzing that thought. The biggest caveat here is the usual one for meditation, which is thoughts are very easy to get lost in the content. So remember that you are actually examining the thought. Again, notice if you're lost in the thinking or able to analyze the thinking. If you're lost, come back to analyzing it. If you're falling asleep, just meditate with your eyes open. There's no reason to have your eyes closed to do this, and it will help you stay awake if your eyes are open. Just look at the floor or whatever. It's better than falling asleep. Another feature besides whether it's true or not, extreme or not, about you or not, and kind or not, is to notice whether you like the thought or dislike the thought or feel neutral about the thought. you're falling asleep, open your eyes, stay awake. Good. So let's let go of that for a moment. Just out of curiosity, raise your hand if most of the thoughts were like negative or thoughts you didn't like. Out of curiosity. Okay. And what about, how many of you were having the same thought real often? Kept coming up over and over. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting, right? Good, so this is, we'll do part 2 of this in a minute, but this is a way to just kind of like sample some thinking, like there might have been a whole bunch more thinking going on, but you're just noticing some thoughts and then looking at certain qualities of those thoughts. And when you do this, even for a little bit, like maybe more than we did today, but if you do it for a while, you'll notice that you often had no idea what you were thinking, which is really interesting. Just like people don't know what they're feeling, really often, you know, if I asked anyone if they knew what they were thinking, they would always say yes. But when you do this, after a while you realize, no, you don't. There's a lot of thoughts going on in there that you're just not paying any attention to, but they're right there. It's really fascinating. So let's do some Q&A on this technique before we go deeper. Yeah.
I have a situation in my life that's causing a lot of anxiety, and so even more so than the emotion meditations we did earlier, I was feeling a lot of anxiety, and it was kind of, I don't know if it was drowning, like I know that there are thoughts behind that anxiety, and I was trying to access them, but mostly I was just feeling the body sensations and anxiety. And I wanted to get in touch with those thoughts, but they were kind of, I don't know if well, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. So, are you doing okay?
Yeah.
Like you can handle the anxiety? Yeah, okay.
And it's not so bad when I'm not meditating.
Yeah. So you know, in the Shinzen has a great like little mnemonic, which is ions, I-O-N, not ions, I-O-N, which is interest, opportunity, necessity. So when you wonder what to meditate on, it's use this formula. What am I interested in? What opportunities are opened up? Or what do I have to meditate on? So in this case,
it's the last one, right? It's like you can't actually meditate on your thinking right now. I have to meditate on feeling. Luckily, you know how to do that. So just let go of the one you thought you were going to do and switch. Right? As long as sitting there meditating on body sensations of anxiety was working for you. Did that feel okay? I mean, meaning, could you do it without
I
being?
could do it.
Yeah.
It didn't really, it came and went.
Yeah.
And so it was building up again.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it a little bit in the past, but my deep history is a lot of anxiety way back a long time ago, and that's why I got going in meditation in the first place. Back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and we were all anxious a lot about getting eaten. Yeah, but what the breakthrough was actually was first meditating on body sensations of emotion, but the real breakthrough was the thing that you just described, which is that it actually comes and goes. And for me, the terrible thing about anxiety was on an anxious day, it would just seem to be pegged at 11 the whole day. And I'm like, oh, this is going to be one of those days, and it's just going to be all day. And, but when I actually tuned in to the body sensations, it wasn't all day. It would be 11 sometimes, but 7 sometimes, and even every once in a while, like 3. And so it was my mind that was, my concept about the anxiety that was making it seem like it was always so high. And so noticing that fluctuation, I was like, wait a minute, there's some breaks in there. I can take a break, even on a bad day, just by waiting for the anxiety to ebb a little bit. And so I would start to get those breaks. And then, anxiety is like a feedback loop. Once you've got breaks in it, it just starts completely collapsing. And after a while, it just, it has a hard time ever revving up again. Sometimes it revs up, but, as soon as you start looking for those breaks, it's like it just breaks up again. So that fluctuation is a big deal. Hi.
Hi. How common is it, or is it okay, am I doing it wrong, to qualify?
You're definitely doing it wrong.
Do I need to ask these questions?
That's right. You'll always know the answer.
It's such a consistent pattern with me. To answer these questions, kind of qualifiers, like, well, it's true-ish, or it's, it's black and white in the sense that, and I'm kind of maybe looking too deeply into the questions. I don't know. I suspect that that's the case, but maybe it's not.
This question goes in the direction of the next part of this, which is, in terms of most negative thought patterns, there's some things that you can use in cognition to help deconstruct them. So instead of like removing the content and deconstructing the sensory of that welling, we actually look at the content itself and go, wait a minute, is that actually true? With a negative thought, right? What if it, I don't know, And actually, you look at the extreme quality, it's like, it's super black and white and global, like everyone in the whole world totally sucks. Right? That might come up as a thought. All people fucking suck. And it's like, well, maybe that's true, but probably not. And maybe, what if it's not everyone? And what if it's not the whole world, right? And by doing that, you're already way softening that kind of blanket statement. And you notice the minute you do that, the feeling about it starts to really shift, right?
Yeah, it kind of mitigates things, and I thought maybe I was just trying to take the easy way out there.
You weren't. You know, that's the way, the thing to do is to notice that thoughts that aren't so global, that aren't so extreme, where you even question a little bit, like the total veracity of it, stuff like that, it starts to become way easier to work with. So yeah, that's a good move. Yes?
Where do we get that longer list?
Oh, you know, you could go right online today and get, just look at a cognitive behavioral therapy list of cognitive distortions. These things are called cognitive distortions. So it will be stuff like global thinking, so the whole world or everyone in the world, black and white thinking, a whole list of those. You actually put it on the other side is how it goes. We're wearing it backwards all day, but
Yeah, I just noticed
thought
that
that was the music,
it
so-
looked right on you, and then it couldn't look right on me. So like this?
yeah, and it goes around
And the
the
thing goes
back.
around the back. Yeah, I saw it on the back of your head, and
There
it
we
looked
go.
much more stylish than whatever I was doing with it. Yeah, Andre, and then yeah.
Yes, thank you. I was reading a document by somebody who was trying to do an equivalent of see, hear, feel, but for thought content. And it went something like word content, and then felt meaning, and then something like phenomena. And they were trying to describe how thoughts kind of arise from phenomena, and then they go into felt meaning, and then we try to get words, and then obviously there's like a bunch of movement between these three levels as a sort of a way to generalize it. And I was just curious, one, does that resonate with you guys as people who are very experienced meditators, is somewhat accurate? And two, do you know of any practices that would be doing this, that would be focusing on trying to dig into that, I guess?
So I think we're going to be doing that sort of practice shortly.
Okay.
Well, sort of.
Sort of.
I mean, I'll do it without the thing, but
Okay. I've now got it really well positioned on my head. I don't want to take it off again.
Exactly. It's like, I'm gonna just
I won't get it back
I'm
here.
gonna photograph Tucker in a minute. I don't quite get it because the felt meaning part would be the body sensation. And my way of understanding it, right? The see, hear, feel already covers that. But there's a way it might not. I can see a loophole in there. So I'd have to really understand what they were talking about. I'd love to read it.
Yeah. It's free online and stuff, so
Sure.
it's hard to read, but I imagine that.
It'd be interesting. So I'll just claim ignorance and say, let me look further into it.
I will find a way to send it.
Okay.
But what's it?
What was my name?
Yeah.
Edward.
Edward.
I was just wondering if this is not the correct way to do it. I was kind of noticing waiting for a thought every 15 to 20 seconds, and then going through like the whole list of like attributes, and waiting for thoughts was like waiting for hear in, I guess. Thought about it?
Yeah, so I think, you project much better when you wear this thing properly too. So often, somebody was talking about this earlier, when you look at the thought space, it suddenly, like for the first time ever, gets quiet, right? So I was doing something similar. I was waiting till something came up. I don't know that I would run it through all, so I think we had 5 tests there. I would probably run it through the 1 or 2 loudest. Like if the most people seem to do this thing where the thoughts you have about yourself are like especially mean, like meaner than thoughts you would have about somebody you didn't like. If somebody else walks in late, it's okay, whatever, you barely even notice it. If you walk in late, it's like, everybody hates me, I'm an asshole, I ruin everything. So if the like main flavor of the thought is that it's cruel, I'd probably label it with that one, or cruel or personal, right? That when you walk through the door, this is an especially bad thing to do relative to everyone else. Why don't we take a break in just a minute, because it seems like everyone is standing up and moving.
Let's just take a break.
Okay, let's just take a break. I'm pretty loud.
I have that position.
No, I brought up anxiety. And that felt like the same thing about working entirely. It's like attending halfway. Yeah. Yeah.
I even pictured like a scale that looks like but maybe I should, I think it's yeah. And then I use one of the like visual.
It's a little bit similar, noticing the way that the way that one puts across.
What's up? Oh, great. The document. Yes. Yes. Can I if I just send it over?
Sure, yeah. Are you in the Shinzen group?
I
Are you in the group called Shinzen?
I get overwhelmed by reading books like that because they just keep posting things. I'm like, I must read this, but don't say it just but I can join it. But yeah,
My email is really easy. It's just Michael Taft
and also, what felt to me is, so they had a really good job describing it. It's, let's say that we have the word cat, right? And if we use it a lot, like 20 to 100 times, you'll notice that eventually you stop speaking, it just doesn't sound like, or, yeah, it's just noise, right? So they describe the both.
What's your name again? Thanks, Andre. I can't read you read it.
Yeah, it's really hard to read though.
Right. Yeah. It's like the images on the left, and it's like anytime there's like a important thing, it's like, yeah. Yeah. So it's, yeah. Yeah. No. So page 2 came first, of course, but I'm on, it's like one of those websites where you can like edit whatever personality thing. Society 6. It's called, and like you got a bunch of stuff uploaded, and like you can reposition the image or like kind of Photoshop it so like it pulls thinking you something, and then like, so I have the painting basically like twice a mirror. So it like fits like this on leggings. The back of the arms around my butt, you know? But yeah, it's cool because I mean like you can get anything on like a mug or an iPhone case or a bed spread, like you know, leggings, a t-shirt, backpacks, like anything. Like a wall. And so it's really just people have been getting prints. I haven't bought any of the like big cameras for some people, but yeah, when I've sold you on prints and stuff, I'll like reach out. So yeah, like smaller prints. I know, I did. Yeah, I start not this Monday, but the following Monday, and my first day is going to be it's a little like sitting with the uncertainty. I mean,
No, I mean, like when the words come up, it's like anxiety or fear or that stuff. That's when the words like insert themselves. I'm like comfortable and relaxed. Like, you know, like anytime it's like you have shit to do, like that's wow. Yeah. Do you need any? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, if you need some more, save it. I'm good. Like that was yeah. Yeah, hungry. Snacks available, right? Yeah.
So, in standard Vipassana, one of the main ways that we typically meditate is to not interact with the phenomena as much as possible, right? So you're not judging it, you're not controlling it, you're not manipulating it, you're just letting it be. And in fact, that's one of the main ways to kind of see what bees, right? See what is there and just get a good clue about the state of mind you're in or whatever, is to just have a lot of equanimity, meaning not a lot of reactivity to the content or to what's arising. But of course, in Vipassana, we also do metta in that tradition, which is like, replacing content pretty explicitly, really manipulating and controlling content so that you're making it more positive, and building positive mind states and making a habit of positive mind states. But we're going to try something different, which is the second part of this meditation that we did. So it will be the same exact technique. So thought comes up, we examine it, but then we're going to replace it. Okay? So, goes in tight. So, if the, let's say, it's a really extreme thought, can you make it more gray area, less black and white, less global, more nuanced? Instead of all this are X, even just saying, well, maybe some things are X, right? Or like that. It softens it dramatically. If it's not true, we want to say, at least say something like, well, it seems to me, even though it's not true, but you could even just say a truer statement, right? So try to make it truer or realer or more grounded, right? So if you're angry, you could be, all these, bastards in the world are like this. And it's one thing to say, well, maybe some of them are kind of that way. But maybe a truer statement is, well, I'm just feeling like some of them are like this. And notice what that's doing to that thought. I mean, not only is it, there's a reason they call them cognitive distortions, because having things be super black and white, super global, totally one way is a distortion, right? The world is very, very rarely like that, if ever. So we're removing the distortion, making it a lot more nuanced, a lot clearer, and also generally more positive. Yes?
So the type of thoughts you describe are more verbal in nature and kind of a judgment or something like that. What happens if most of the thoughts are more kind of visual and more kind of a neutral, random thing that you see happening in your mind, which is not, everything you're saying seems to not really apply to that type of thought?
Yeah, this is mainly a cognitive verbal exercise. Now, Christina was asking me about mental visual stuff. I have tons of mental visual stuff, but there's got to be verbal stuff in there also. And yeah, and I will say, to what extent if you notice types of visual thoughts that are like what I'm describing, remake them visually if you can. Okay? It's kind of a weird exercise, but give it a shot. So the idea is to actually undistort the thought and rethink it. And just to give it some weight, you would say it 3 times in your mind, right? And then just move on. Another thing that really often happens is that you'll notice that some of these thoughts are very repetitive. Especially, highly distorted ones about yourself. You might find yourself all day long just going, God, I'm so stupid, God, I'm so stupid, God, I'm so stupid. And so clearly that is a cognitive distortion, and it's super repetitive. So, you would want to work with that one over and over again, even if it's just the same thing over and over. Anish?
So I noticed that just the attempt to try to pick thoughts, there seemed to be a little performative component of the mind that kicked in saying, oh, you want thoughts? Okay, here you go, thoughts. And like they seem, I mean, whatever the hell is generating these doesn't seem to be the normal process that basically just keeps simmering normally when you're not trying to look at them. So I'm a little concerned that whatever is happening, I'm not getting the real thoughts here.
There's no way past that. It's like whatever we look for in the mind, we're changing the mind. That's just, you can't do anything about that. So all you do is try to not do that as much as possible. And furthermore, most of these things only happen strongly when you first start. Because it's the same thing, you're not used to feeling your feelings in that way, so they get weird for a minute. But eventually, feelings start, the normal ones start coming up. Same with thinking. If you sit there day after day doing that, it won't feel weird anymore, and the normal stuff just starts coming up. Yeah. Yes?
Thank you.
What if you don't have that many thoughts at that time? Would it be okay to come up with positive thoughts for yourself, or would that take away from?
It's a different exercise, but that's a fine exercise to do. Okay? So it's kind of that ions thing. It's like, well, interest, opportunity, necessity. Right now, there's not much mental content arising to work with, so I'll do something else.
I was wondering about rumination. So if there's like thoughts of rumination, do I stick to those?
When you say that, I mean, that's what I was talking about when I said repetitive thoughts. Do you mean something different?
Yeah, I was thinking exactly that. Should I just stick to those and go through think about all those questions towards those thoughts and stick with them instead of letting them go?
In this case, rework, like hearing the ruminative thought and then thinking of, going through the analysis and then undoing some of the distortion and rethinking it is actually what you're supposed to do in the psychological exercise, right? We're just doing it as a meditative exercise, but it strongly helps to undo those kind of ruminations. Anything you want to say about this, Tucker? Or just stuff in general?
Yeah, the one thought that came to mind was respect to Nancy's question about thinking positive. I would make sure that you keep the thoughts accurate more so than positive. If the thought is nobody likes me, and you replace it with I'm awesome and everybody likes me, this thought's not true either. And if you hold an overly positive view, reality's going to be pretty painful for you. The automatic thoughts, just like Michael was saying, tend to be extreme in a way that is false, right? I'm incompetent. You never meet anybody who's truly incompetent. They can't do anything well, right? The real thoughts are more nuanced. I'm good at some things and bad at other things. Most people like me, although a couple people don't, something like that. So I think when you're rephrasing the thoughts, you're looking for the most positive thing you can come up with that doesn't sacrifice accuracy.
That's why we put true as the first part, right? It's got to be real.
The anxious ones, I think, I get a lot about like, this person doesn't like me, or I've said a horrible thing, and no, they do like me, and I say nice things is a little too far for me to the positive side. Something more like, a true thought is often one where the problem that would arise is something you could handle, If this person was mad at me, we could talk it out and it would be okay. If I said a stupid thing, everybody says stupid things, I can forgive myself that, I can recover from that, The negative exists, it's not the end of the world. The mind tends to, like I was talking about this morning, collapse. is usually the negative that causes it to collapse. The idea of these thoughts are expanding it. Some things are good, some things are bad. There are problems, I can handle them, stuff like that.
Thanks. So again, the basic instructions are super easy, which is to, allow the thoughts to arise, examine them for whether they're true, whether they're extreme, whether, we'll leave off the whether you like or dislike them, just about whether they're about me or not, and whether they're kind. And then restate it in a way that takes out that ups the truth and takes out the extremity and is kind. And then you just think it a few times and then carry on. Yes?
Can you talk more about the is it about me? Are we just trying to replace negative thoughts about ourselves, or are we generically trying to replace thoughts about ourselves with thoughts about others? Or third?
No, whatever thought comes up, really. It's just that the ones about me, ones about ourselves, tend to be way worse.
Okay.
It's just one of the interesting things to notice.
Got it.
So you can, if I'm going around all day saying, those motherfuckers suck, it's important for me to get in there and rework that. Let's try it. Anybody notice that this is hard? Yeah, the habits of mind are habits. So it's hard to get in there and just really make them conscious and then replace them. So that's why we're not doing this for like an hour solid and stuff. It takes a lot of effort. So that first bout was like 20 minutes, and we'll do another thing that's a little shorter than that, but about that much. Again, if you're sleepy, open your eyes or even stand up.
Good. It was just a little teeny bit of that. So questions or comments about that experience? Yes, Genevieve.
That was kind of amazing in comparison. Maybe it was the green tea in between the two sets, but I had kind of a big breakthrough with the visual stuff. I started noticing when I was storytelling and when it wasn't true. So I just kept applying true to the visual memories or reformations of memory, as it were, and that led me to look at then where am I trying to change reality, where am I trying to make it into something that it's not, which is a lot like anything in grasping.
Maybe just exactly a lot like it, yeah.
Yeah, I never really tied that together before.
That's really cool. Yeah, working with the visual stuff is not the way this is normally taught, and so this is something we can develop. It's interesting to me. So I have a lot of visual thoughts too. Yeah. Yes.
This was pretty powerful. Is there anything quote unquote wrong if it turns out there is a series of related thoughts? Because every time you, like it almost felt like a series of clarifications or breakthroughs one after the other. You know, like there's something I've been struggling with for a while, and it's been on my mind for a long time. The thing that's been at the surface was the thought that came up. I tried to apply the tests, tried to find a more true, kinder, more authentic expression of the same thing. That led to like immediately another thought arising, and this chain continued for a while. Is that normal, or?
I don't know if it's normal, but there's certainly nothing wrong with it. That sounds like great.
I mean, it was great.
I'm just gonna hold it. I think both the questions you asked had a similar theme. It's the idea that there are organic things like really arising in your mind naturally. And then there's you fucking the whole thing up, inserting the wrong thoughts and so on. The way I would think about that is I would only consider it being you doing something if it is at the coarsest, most obvious conscious level. If you have decided, I'm going to think about horses, that's the only way I would say anything other than this is just naturally arising. The dichotomy breaks apart pretty quickly between what's occurring and what's volitional.
Okay, the second part felt much more organic. It seemed to have associated sensations.
Sorry, I missed an important word. The second part felt much more
Organic.
organic. Oh.
It seemed to be arising from and have associated sensations.
Yeah.
So I found that really intense.
Ooh, intense how?
The first thing that my mind jumped to with this exercise, and not with the first one, was like some of the things I have the most anxiety about in my entire life, and like the thoughts that are underneath them. And I noticed at a couple points it got to be like a little too much, and then I noticed there was just like an explosion of like silly, superficial, unrelated thoughts, like, oh, I saw this pattern in the sidewalk earlier, I wonder what shape that is, you know? And it seemed like there was part of me that was trying to like replace the anxious stuff with that.
You think?
It seems like the only explanation.
When I was talking about the three mechanisms towards working with suffering, this is delusion. One of the ways that you use delusion for safety is the panic room, right? The safe space. Like, ooh, anxiety, no. Okay, let's get teddy bears and bubble baths. Going into the panic room where nothing can touch you. It's not a problem that you do that. Everybody does that. It's great to be able to see, oh, the reason I'm going to the panic room is that I don't like what's happening right now, so I'm going to get myself bubbly and confused.
So I guess the question was, like, when that happens, should I just kind of let it happen, or should I try to go back to the thing that triggered it?
I would let go of, if the thing it sent you to is superficial or fake like that, I would let it go and go back where you came from. Before we go on with that, just want to say one more thing. So we've been talking about Shinzen a few times. My best friend is named Jay, and he's doing this brain zapping research with Shinzen.
Jay Sanguinetti.
And we're with Shinzen's ex-wife, and we were doing this, they're good friends. We're doing this brain zapping thing. And she said, I really have to pee. I'll do the brain zapping thing as soon as I come back. And I was like, no, this is a weird thing to test, but could you not pee? We're looking at how the zapping affects craving. Could you actually stay here? And she said, I'm gonna like pee in the chair or something. It's like, oh, okay, you have to go, we can disconnect you, would you try? And she stayed. And it was amazing, actually. The zapping worked. We finished and she didn't leave for the bathroom. The point of my bringing this up is the sensations of needing to go to the bathroom tend to come and go the same as any other sensations. And I was just noticing that this retreat, people seem to be constantly up and down going to and from the bathroom. So my suggestion was going to be, we will have one more break before we end. If you're really going to foul the chair that you're sitting in, please go to the bathroom. But if you're able to be mindful of that sensation and stay still, I think that would be good both for your practice and for the kind of general flow of the retreat. Yeah, go ahead. What's your name?
Blake.
Blake, yes.
Yeah. So definitely I had the typical thoughts come up, relabel them, and then try to rework them. But then also there were just neutral thoughts or like a joke coming up that didn't seem to be connected to it at all, and I didn't know how to work that into this framework. Do I just observe it? Do I just let it go? Do I try to get back to something I could undistort?
I would, yeah, I was having the same. We were listening to the radio on the way here, and the song that had been on the radio kept playing. I would ignore thoughts that are completely useless like that. It's similar to...
Oh, actually, I never said my name. I'm Nick.
Nick. Oh, sorry. I thought you said it last time.
Sorry.
Yeah, similar to Nick's point, like the songs and the thoughts about nothing are sometimes hypnagogia, like your mind is falling asleep and this is what it produces when it's falling asleep. They're often ways of keeping you away from mental content. So yeah, I would ignore things that seem totally pointless like that.
If we were doing like regular style vipassana on it, you would still like go into that sensory content and let it deconstruct. But with this, since it is about the content, you're able to judge, well, this is kind of frivolous content. So go on to something a little more important.
What's your name?
Katya. Yeah, I've had a surprising experience today in that very little negative. Yeah, and a lot of neutrality.
She's over there with a huge smile on her face.
But I guess my question is, and I'm trying to update my self-concept a little here, because I tend to think of myself as a worrier and an anxious person and, ruminating, whatever. And maybe I'm having a good day, but I think maybe paying attention in this way is like, maybe my brain isn't quite what I think it is. So, I don't know. Curious.
I had chronic pain for a while, and that was my object of meditation. And I think our batteries died,
I think
right?
it's over, yeah.
Okay. For a while, I was meditating just on the feelings of the chronic pain, and then it went away. And I went to the meditation center, and this old man was there, and I asked him about it. He said that this happened to him many years ago. And he went and asked the monk, what do I do? And the monk said, go sit on a sharp rock. It's weird when suddenly nothing's wrong. It's the promise of the Dharma, right? That like the Buddha talks about dust in your eyes, and that when you wipe it away as the pure, unblemished vision of the Dharma. It turns out when you let go of all these emotions, when you practice Sati Sampajana, I know what it is, and swipe left. It feels great. The unblemished nature of the mind seems to be joy and happiness.
Yeah, another thing, it relates to what I was saying to Lara about anxiety, which is sometimes the idea you have about a thing is
really different than the updated version of the thing, right? Which is, also what Tucker's pointing at. When you actually see it, it turns out that the model the narrative model you have about what conscious is like is old, distorted, extreme, all of that. So as we, on purpose, clarify, guess what? Maybe what's going on in there is quite different than we thought. There's that old literary style that James Joyce created, stream of consciousness, right? And he didn't create it?
No, I did not create it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What's so fascinating is the idea, the book is just going along with someone's thinking. But the more that you work on meditating on thoughts and talking, I talk a lot with people about meditating on thoughts, you realize it's more of a stream of unconsciousness. Like, I was just saying that earlier, it's like you think you're aware of what you're thinking, but when you get in there, it's really different than what's mainly going on. And if you take this to the deepest level, that's why people are saying everyone's mind at the fundamental basis is actually already awake. Because as you remove these layers of unconsciousness and delusion and, just seeing unclearly way down in there, there's bright wakefulness, right? Where everything's fine.
Then, like right now, out of meditation, I feel back in my little worried self.
It's just a habit.
So that's the habit.
Yeah.
So I'll just keep meditating and try to update the identity.
Yeah, I would look too for the sense of self and the sense of comfort in being a worrier. I've had it a few times where somebody who's always been anxious, the anxiety starts fading, and it feels like a panic attack, like the way you know you're alive is how much tension there is in your body. And when it relaxes, it's like it could be death.
Yeah. Yeah, I've totally seen this too. Like people who am I if I'm not having anxiety?
Yeah, I just kind of melt when you say that.
Yeah, you might notice the way that you almost hold your issues like a teddy bear and you snuggle them up against you. If you're willing to let go of who you're supposed to be and what you normally feel like, it's pretty chill who you get to be sometimes. And don't worry, you'll still get to be anxious again. It's not done. Yeah, I never saw it.
I'm just curious, these practices, you mentioned sati sampajana, traditionally speaking, where does it fit in the grand scheme of, the sati practices, or are there like special type of Buddhists who do more that kind of stuff, or, what's the history of these type of practices?
I mean, the short version, you want to take that?
Go ahead.
The short version is, what we've mainly been working with here today is Sutrayana, right? It's Theravada stuff. And so I'm using both of those terms on purpose, so it's okay if you can't find them, we're just going to talk loud.
Do we want to bring
thanks,
them closer to us, distort the image to make the audio better?
You can try.
Just to let you guys know, we had feedback that the audio was great even without them.
Oh, okay, great.
Oh, cool.
So
Cool.
So, anything from Theravada tradition is kind of like Buddhism version 1, right? And so when we start talking about versions, that's where we use the yanas model. So version 1 is Sutrayana. Sometimes it's called Hinayana, but actually that's kind of pejorative. So we'll call it Sutrayana.
The lesser vehicle.
The lesser vehicle. So we'll call it the way of the sutras. So Sutrayana. And then version 2 is Mahayana. So the big vehicle, and then version 3, Vajrayana, thunderbolt vehicle, or lightning vehicle, or whatever. There's a lot of translations. But most of the way of working that we're describing is Sutrayana. So it fits into kind of the basis. That's why we can talk about straight from Four Noble Truths and suffering and this kind of analysis. And one of the things that's interesting is later Buddhisms, like especially V3, evolved a lot of psychological stuff. It's just medieval psychological stuff from a very different culture. And so it hasn't been massively adapted to Western psychology or modern scientific stuff, but they did start to take it in this direction quite a bit. And another thing I find really interesting is some modern therapies that have scientific basis that have been proven to be effective, such as DBT, you know, there's a dialectical behavioral therapy. You know, that's not only like scientifically proven, validated to be effective, but it's effective on something that nothing else ever has been ever, right? It's like, it's gold standard practice for working with borderline personality disorder. I'm bringing it up because the woman who created it, who I'm blanking on her name, I met her in Spain. Yeah, she's a 30-year Zen meditator who's using these principles from Mahayana Buddhism directly in, you know, to help make the therapy more effective, and a bunch of mindfulness principles also. So I kind of threw a bunch of stuff in there that I wanted to say anyway. But, you know, most of what we're talking about right here is Sutrayana. But there's a lot more to say about other yanas and how they work with psychology, stuff like that. So it's a big topic.
Within Sutrayana, so sati is like an ultimate goal, right? So the Buddha learns concentration, he learns jhana practices. The idea of applying mindfulness, I mean, who knows if the Buddha was a real person, but at least as the story goes, the idea of applying mindfulness was his addition. So
it's his, you know, intellectual property, original intellectual property.
So, like, the idea is whatever path you're doing ought to be building to that. So if you're doing pure like anapana, just focusing on the breath, this isn't going to have that effect, but it's going to have a lot of positive effects on your mind. It's going to be stable, it's going to be sharper, your sensory clarity should go up, such that when you do start doing vipassana, your vipassana is much better, you know? If you're doing Brahma Vihara practice, this brightens the mind, removes some of the veils of separation so that you can see more clearly. Like we've been talking about a few times today, if you just tell someone, see what your foot feels like, they often absolutely can't. So some of these practices you consider preparatory or almost like working out before competing. Should we maybe take a quick break and then we'll move to the last phase?
Let's take a break. Everybody go pee. With what? Yeah, it's easier without it.
Okay. Yeah, I like it. It's plastic and it's batteries in there. It's not. I like with even bring chairs up and we can basically ask people. What's the most exciting thing? You keep saying the same thing. You get a question, it's exactly right. So I think us riffing on each other, replacing yeah, it's just seems like there's so much to people start looking sleepy or no one. And then maybe we can do it. 10 minutes. It sounds good.
Yeah, no, it's like.
I can help. One
Corinne, this is going to come over here, so it's going to be right in your way, sorry. I'm going to move it out a little bit too. There we go. I'm not sure us facing each other is going to work.
Oh, you don't like that one?
Well, I like it, but let's try it. Maybe like 45 degrees. And then if you sit there, you might have to get real close.
I'm a very snuggly sort of person.
What's that?
I'm a very snuggly sort of person. Real close. That sounds good for me.
Okay.
Do we know how many people are with us?
Well, I don't right now. Usually it's about 50. Wow. After that, it's as many as
Well, hi everybody. So, we've slightly changed our orientation, as you may have noticed. I'm straight now. No, sorry, that's a different medium.
That's never going to happen.
That's never. There's not enough meditation in the world for that. We've changed our orientation with respect to each other, which sorry, Christina. Which. Anyways. What I mean to say is, my apologies if our backs are now to you, and you're welcome to obviously move your chair if you'd like.
Or if the thing is blocking your view or whatever.
So we met about 6 months ago, and we became very fast friends. And the thing that has been most exciting for me today, this is the first time we've taught together, is we trained in, we trained separately, we trained in different lineages, and I just feel like we have the same thoughts on just about everything. Anytime Michael answers a question, I think that's exactly what I was going to say, and that doesn't happen very often. So we were thinking it would be fun if we ended the day with, instead of a standard Q&A, a discussion where the Q&A might provide prompts. So you tell us what you'd like to know about, and we will then talk to each other about what you would like to know about. And I haven't tried this before, and if it sucks, we will be totally equanimous.
We'll blame you guys for
We will be
questions.
totally equanimous about that. What? Oh, instead of like us taking turns answering the question.
Does it want us to keep doing it, or does it mean like?
Oh, I was just being silly. I didn't mean anything by that.
Humor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. So something that I can hear about some more about is the imagination, because in meditation, when I'm daydreaming.
Can you expand that question a little bit?
Well, when I'm concentrating or attempting to concentrate on suggestions that were made, and having, to use the expression success, and then allowing that to continue, this imagination, these daydreams come up, these fantasies come up, and I see them as fantasies, and I see them as imagination. And then so I just bring them back to my breath, to bring myself back to the consciousness. My eyes are open. But so imagination in meditation and daydreaming in meditation.
Want to start?
Yeah. So I would think that this, you know much more about the Tantra than I do, where the imagination realm becomes something useful that you want to cultivate.
Yeah.
I tend to think that most of us, we're not doing Buddhism for dummies, right? In addition to the cuss words, we use lots of big words, technical words. The kind of people that study with the likes of us tend to be the kind of people who are in their head a lot of the time. And it's why my sense usually in meditation is, if I notice I'm focusing on something that's not really happening right now, I tend to come back to something that's real. But what do you think?
Yeah, you brought up the Tantra issue, and that is, or even Mahayana, even Zen. It just depends on what you're trying to do. So, it's funny, I'm not sure if I'm talking to you or talking to Noe. It's kind of, but I'll just kind of talk. It depends on what you're trying to do. One of the things that in the Shinzen lineage, which even though Shinzen is teaching supposedly Vipassana, it's really Zen disguised as Vipassana, with a lot of Vipassana techniques. But eventually, as I said, you're letting go of the content of the mind in terms of content and emotions in terms of content, and getting into the fact that it's process, right? Stuff, you're noticing the energy of the mind and the movement of the mind, but not the content of the mind. And when that's going on, nothing's imagination, or to put it a different way, you don't know if it's imagination or something you're supposed to be concentrating on or not, right? That's not an important distinction at that point. Then it's just, am I focused on my mind or not? All content is allowed because it's just activity. So it just depends on what technique you're doing, But what I do find is that those types of meditation techniques, over time, do a deeper psychological thing with the mind, because they do allow, it subverts the the membrane between like conscious and unconscious, and the suppression and denial mechanisms get really, really permeable, and maybe even some of it gets removed. So you have easier access to unconscious material, it seems like. I mean, maybe it's all bullshit, I don't know, but it sure seems like it. So, and in general, in like Mahayana or Tantra, that would be called making friends with your mind, right? There's, at a point, there's no thoughts that aren't allowed because it's all open, right? You're used to just allowing content like that. So you're still concentrated, but just in a very different way, right? So under those conditions, imagination is great, and it turns out meditating like that is really good for imagination. But when we're doing Sutrayana, when we're doing Theravada, you just want to concentrate on what you're supposed to concentrate on, and all that imaginary stuff, you just block it out.
And I think the Mahayana stance on imaginary sorts of practices, or especially the ones that blur the line between imagination and default world out here, these are advanced practices. These aren't things that you'd want to jump into for both reasons. That if you're just watching your mind daydream, this is the same thing you'd be doing otherwise. Right? Without some skill, this is the opposite of meditation. The other reason being blurring the boundary between what is the sensory experience that everyone around me agrees on and what do I think or wish was happening right now. That's madness in the quite clear-cut bad sense of the term. So I think the teaching is, you want to be real well prepared before you go into spending a lot of time focusing your mind on things that are not real, where that word means what most people who run mental hospitals would agree on is real.
Yeah, especially if you're like really focusing on generating imaginary content as content, right? Yeah, it really becomes a thing. And another supposed prerequisite, I think it is a prerequisite, some traditions don't, for doing that type of work, is that you've already deeply contacted emptiness. So you probably minimally have stream entry or second pass, so that if difficult material comes up, you know how to dissolve it or see its unreality or whatever. So it's typically more advanced.
I'm digging this format, by the way.
I'm totally confused and paralyzed.
Go ahead.
I hope this isn't a rude question, it might be. Can you talk about your own practice?
That's the third time he said that today.
I'm curious about whether, as more advanced meditators, you're still doing the same practices that you're recommending to us, or whether there are other things that you, like what do you do?
One of the main things I love doing is the thing I'm just talking about, where, and this is a more like Mahayana, Vajrayana type practice, but you can do a Sutrayana version of it. It's just, you gotta kind of be ready for it, but it's just to sit with your mind and allow whatever happens to happen, can be as, distracted or confused or whatever as it wants, but you have perfect concentration on that, and it's all just, because you're so concentrated, it's all continuously dissolving. That's exquisite. It's just continuous emptiness in the mind, and even though there's a tremendous amount of material arising, you're not really interacting with it as content, you're interacting with it as process. And that starts to be, it becomes immediately clear that the mind is like totally natural. Right? It's not mechanical, it's not some artificial thing. The brain itself just has this, quality of being like a snail or a cloud or something, where it's just, as process, it's just full unfolding. That's not a super advanced meditation, but it's really nice. So I'm always talking about, you guys who come to my class, I talk about that all the damn time. You just have to get to the place where it's easy to do.
Yeah, I found that there was a period where practice was really intense. There was a lot of fireworks, things were dissolving into emptiness. my like day-to-day experience is pretty normal again. So my meditations are pretty normal. The main thing I teach is concentration, and I'm like really bad at concentration. My natural talent for it is one of the 10 worst of any of the students that I've had. So, I do concentration practice a lot. I have made headway on it over the years, and the effects are really good for me. Like, it helps the insights that you get from meditation, I think it helps them percolate into daily life. We hadn't talked about this, but I've been thinking in terms of ion recently, and the last 2 days actually I've been doing the exact practice that Michael just described. These cycles used to be a lot more intense, but like when you start seeing form and emptiness, it's like your mind will toggle between the two. In the beginning, it will toggle intensely, like nothing exists, everything's perfect, nothing needs to be done. And it's like, you haven't done laundry in 2 fucking weeks. Like, do the laundry, do the laundry, do the laundry. It tends to go like this, like nothing matters, everything matters, and you're failing. Like that. I don't have those kind of swings, but my mind's been swinging recently between like, kind of great, open gratitude, so happy I'm leading the life I'm leading, not needing to change anything, and then last couple days, like, just, like, resist everything, like, nothing goes the right way in the universe, like, happiness is about making sure you stop everything, and so it's why I've been doing the last couple days practice Michael's describing, where it's like you watch the whole mind, you just see what it's creating, you see the craving, the like, oh yeah, this one I want to get rid of, this one I want to keep it. You see the orientation your mind's going to have towards it, and you try to just let it go, let it dissolve, let it dissolve, let it dissolve. The state I've been in recently is one where I feel like I need a higher dose of emptiness before other things are going to be particularly useful for me.
You mentioned about the 3 groups of, in regard to psychedelic use. Like, there's like one group, like, yeah, maybe not a good idea for you. And I was wondering where you kind of would draw the line with meditation, where it might become counterproductive if someone has had severe trauma, is experiencing severe anxiety, like, you know, clinical stuff, or depression. Like, where it could help, where it could hurt, and when maybe it's time to back off a little bit, if you have thoughts around that?
Yeah, so small amounts of meditation have almost no side effects. So one thought would be, if your mind state is especially bad right now, start low, you know, do 15 minutes. When that feels okay, do 20 minutes. I mean, I've taught meditation to many people with pretty bad mental illness over the years. Generally, getting to know your head is a good idea. People, I would say, don't do it. Like, you know, recent trauma, somebody had been sexually assaulted last week. I'd say keep your eyes open, like be around your support group. Because if there's recent trauma, when you close your eyes, it might just replay, right? Somebody who's psychotic, I would usually say don't do any meditation. If you're having trouble telling the difference between internal and external reality we mean by psychotic the strongest sense of having trouble with that difference, stay grounded in external reality. I haven't worked with a lot of people with mental retardation, but I would say with certain like forms of retardation or neurological limitations, you might want to go slow. That you're releasing content. The idea is then to do something with the content, and if your brain's built in such a way that you may not be able to do anything with content when it arises, you might want to steer totally clear of it. Otherwise, I think the answer is subjective. Like, if you've been terribly anxious and meditating for the last couple days, are you getting a little better? Like, does meditation provide any relief? If it's only making you worse, I'd try things that were more grounding, you know? Maybe like a walking meditation. I had one autistic man who was learning to meditate with me, and it'd be a tactile meditation. So he's staying grounded in a concrete experience while he's doing it.
It's really funny. I mean, if you hang out with born-again Christians in America, it's like almost like, just to totally make a caricature out of it, it's almost like anything goes as long as you tack the word Jesus on it, right? You know, we're gonna do Jesus golf, and then that's cool. And you know, we're laughing, but in like Western Buddhist groups, it has to be meditation. If it doesn't have the word meditation on it, like, you know, tack the word meditation on it.
And then it's expensive.
Yeah, that's right.
Mindful surfing costs 3 times.
That's right. And so we're, in a weird way, let me just contrast that with like the rest of all history. You know, most Buddhists for all of human history have not meditated at all, ever. Most Buddhist monks for all of history, not all, but most did not meditate. Right? It's a special practice. I was saying this the other night, you know, if you read like a book like Making a Buddhist Modernism, all Sutrayana meditation techniques, vipassana techniques, were recreated in the last 150 years from the old manuals, because there was literally no Buddhist monk in the world who knew how to do them anymore from like a lineage way. So they had to go back to the old manuals and start again. So, and you know, places like Tibet, a whole Buddhist country run by monks and stuff, even most Tibetan monks were doing other things, right? Very few of them were like on the meditation path. And it's like this throughout history in all these countries. So, you know, the idea we have that, you know, Jesus is good for everybody. And so is meditation. Like, it's good for everybody, for everything, will solve your issues. Everybody should do it is just nonsense, right? It's really good for some people. And different types of it might be helpful for a lot of people, especially like Tucker's saying, in lower doses or mixed with a lot of psychology like this, can be actually pretty helpful. But, you know, there's a lot of, it's not a panacea and it's not for everybody. And there's a lot of people who just shouldn't do it, I think. So now I like make money as a meditation teacher. So when I'm saying that, you should believe it. So every reason to not say it. But it's just, you know, it's heavy duty medicine. Like, it's serious shit. And in a way that for some people is just the wrong medicine.
Yeah, I don't think we talked to you yet. What's your name?
Jeff.
Jeff, hi.
I have a question about, so you mentioned like walking, thinking about exercise in general, and maybe yoga, which some people talk about as being like a kind of moving meditation. Just what are your general thoughts on like exercise, physical exercise as a complement to the practice or whatever?
I have exercise periods on my retreat. I think if you're trying to wake the mind up, exercise does that. I love doing yoga. I think the thing that is distinct about sitting meditation from any other practice is you're doing nothing. So like, it'd be easy to do like mindful yoga, which is in no way mindful, right? You just like want abs and yoga will have that effect. I mean, it hasn't for me, but it, I keep waiting. Yeah, I think it wakes the mind up. I think Michael might be able to talk more too about like the idea of inner winds, energy through the body that's affected by yoga and by physical movement. I tell all my students to move their bodies in order to help wake up. Do you want to talk about exercise, or maybe about the way yoga might like do energetic things about meditation?
Well, to me, the thing that comes right up is just that, you know, if you listen to most mindfulness teachers, they'll end up using a workout metaphor about meditation. It's like doing reps at the gym. It's building your mind or whatever. It always comes back to this metaphor. And there's a reason for that. You know, it does, especially body culture, where you're working, you know, in a systematic way to get abs or whatever. Got one really strong ab. It's very similar to mindfulness meditation, right? And because of the systematic application and because of the way it grows, stuff like that. And in fact, getting really good at concentrating on micro movements and then using that when you're actually lifting and stuff, or doing, you know, hatha yoga, like really slow and breathing really slow and meditating on the breath and staying in the posture and all that. Like, I lived in LA for a long time, and you know, you go to yoga there, and that is, that's fitness yoga. You're working out, and everyone tends to get injured. But like, you can do that same yoga like at 1/10 the speed, and do it with breathing, where you're mindfulness of breathing, mindfulness of every little tiny little part of the posture. You know, that turns into a walloping meditation at the same time, really good for your body. So stuff like that is just, it was made to go together with it, literally. It's awesome.
So
What's your name?
You guys, sorry?
What's your name?
Oh, David. You guys mentioned that you met 6 months ago, but I assume you kind of knew about each other's lineages.
Lineageship.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what are your favorite things about the other person's, like, teacher's lineage in school?
So, you know, his teacher's Chuladasa. Have you read that book?
Yes.
That is a fucking good book. I mean, that is like a very good meditation manual. It's so systematic and clear, and if you apply the principles, it works. So it's very impressive, and the model of the mind is very impressive. Having interviewed Chuladasa a couple times, I've only just talked to him on the phone, but he was awesome. He's really brilliant in his reformulation of some of this stuff and making it accessible. So to me, like, when people, you know, I've written a mindfulness meditation book, I know all the people who've written the other ones better than I know Chuladasa, right? So, but if people say, like, what's the book? I always say The Mind Illuminated, just if you want to, like, even though it's not actually that much about Vipassana, it's more about shamatha, right? Just getting good at concentrating, and then later on branches out. But I love that right now, that's sort of the primo teaching for just making it clear to Westerners.
The Mind Illuminated? We had a bunch of mutual friends in the pragmatic Dharma world, but I'd never heard Michael's name until I was moving here, and I think Shinzen told me to call him, and Daniel Ingram, and a few other, you know, we had a lot of mutual friends who hadn't crossed paths, and then I didn't realize what a big deal Michael was until I was in Finland, and two different people were like, "Oh my God, you know him? I'm so jealous. Like, what's it like to hang out with him?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "You don't want to know what it's like to hang out with me? He gets to hang out with me." So I mean, I've known Shinzen for quite a long time. He was actually the first person that told me to teach Dharma. The thing I like, two things. I guess they're kind of similar. One is the psychology of it. So Shinzen kind of reinvented the wheel in terms of learning a bunch of different Dharma practices, but then really inventing a lineage, the language that he uses and some of the practice he uses, I think didn't exist before and can't be found anywhere else.
That is true.
The way that it addresses Western psychology, whereas most meditation teachers, maybe not so much in the last few years, but traditionally most meditation teachers ignore Western psychology.
It's useless.
It's delusion, right? Don't think about the terrible thing that happened 10 years ago. Stop it. Go back to your breath. It's like,
Why would you rearrange the content of your mind?
My mind won't go back to the breath. I think too, it's so personalized. So when we were talking about doing this, and Michael was saying, yeah, I do, the meditations are heavily guided. I was like, really? Like, my only guiding is I like push start on insight timer, and then that's like my main role. Yeah, like the psychological nature of it and how personalized the route becomes, like based on where you are in your mind and what your needs are. There's practice tailored for you. When I met Shinzen is now, Shinzen's a pretty obsessive person in general, and he's now obsessed with brain zapping. But when I met him, he was obsessed with building a robot that was going to replace him, called Virtual Shinzen.
You don't realize that that's all you ever talk to now is a robot. He succeeded.
There are some ways in which he doesn't pass the Turing test. But the idea that like, the idea of Virtual Shinzen was like what you're learning in that lineage is based on where you are, there's certain qualities you want to develop and things you want to do, and that in theory, you could make a highly personalized decision tree based on what you said, what you should do next, and that the robot would at some point do that. That was a fun question.
So you talk about chronic pain and meditation. How did you manage both, and did it work for you, and what was your experience?
So meditation can really go either way. I think focusing on a small object will often make chronic pain worse, whereas going big makes chronic pain better. The same thing Michael was talking about earlier, that the concept of pain is like static, and he was talking about anxiety, but the concept of pain or anxiety is static and uniformly painful. Pain hurts, right? One of the promises you get in the Dharma is that like it's possible to have pain that doesn't hurt. And this is, like many of the benefits of the Dharma, a sometimes thing. But I just got way better at living life in pain. I wasn't so concerned whether the pain levels went up or down anymore. I could go on about that indefinitely, so.
Yeah, I mean, I say this a lot in class, so sorry if I'm repeating it, but you know, some of my students have been people with chronic pain, but like a few of them have been people with hellacious, awful chronic pain where they have like morphine pumps implanted in their body continuously, giving them hits of morphine, and they're still in agony, right? So that level of pain, I don't think anyone in here is in quite that much distress, right? And the thing that is amazing is that, you know, little by little you start building all these resources and various types of pleasant experiences they can go to, but little by little you start touching the outer edges of the pain, and then over months and years start going into the center of the pain. And, you know, they're very motivated because they're in agony 24 hours a day, so they keep working with it and keep working with it and keep working with it. And, you know, so far it's like people that I've worked with, and a lot of the people Shinzen has worked with and so on, it's like they eventually learn that what Tucker's saying is possible, you know, that the pain starts to break up and dissipate. It's not that it does that every minute, because you gotta stay highly concentrated, and it's hard to be concentrated every second of the day. Although I will say pain is easy to concentrate on, right? It wants your attention. So there's a method to get in there and work with it with mindfulness. And, even kind of basic stuff like MBSR, right? Mindfulness-based stress reduction is used as a pain reduction technique because it's effective. So it's not a, you'll never experience pain again kind of thing, but it's like, if you learn to do this right, it really works. So, at least for a lot of people.
The first MBSR study, or one of the first in 82, was on chronic pain. And so it was people who, I think it was on average something like 7 years, have been experiencing chronic pain that no medical treatment was addressing. And so they got like a 6-week meditation course, and John Kabat-Zinn and his colleagues there were measuring improvements across different dimensions of life, mood improvements, pain improvements, improvement in role limitation, right? So if you're in pain, you're not gonna run a marathon, but maybe you can make it to the mailbox, something like that. And they found that over the course of the 6 weeks, people hadn't improved on any metric in 7 years, improved on every metric. What was much more interesting to me was 3 years later, they found a bunch of these people and wanted to know, are you still meditating? And how are you doing? And it turned out most of the people were still meditating, and they had to maintain the improvements on every metric except one. During the study, the actual level of pain they were experiencing went down. At follow-up, the pain level was right back where it had started, but nothing else went up with it, which is pretty astounding data that, people like us in a middle-class country outside of a war zone, there's not a lot of problems worse than excruciating pain all the time. But it turns out even with a problem that bad, what the study's pointing to is the worst part is what you do to yourself because of the pain, rather than what the pain is doing to you.
The thing I find most convincing is that when we teach people mindfulness techniques, meditation techniques to work with pain, and they have chronic pain, they tend to use it a lot, right? And they have no reason to bullshit or placate, and so something is working.
Anish?
So in your experience, if you're starting with the baseline of a student who's, let's say, reasonably financially stable, has some amount of time to dedicate to practice every day, maybe between an hour to 2, and is willing to listen and is not obstinate, how long roughly till, what's the variance and statistical distribution of time the student? Roughly, just
I would say 6 months to 40 years.
Yeah, 3 months to 60 years, something like that. Yeah, there's not enough variables in the question. There's like so many different things about people that really make a difference. That being said.
Yeah, I really don't think there's any way to predict this. I've had a few students, you probably have too, who are just like meditation savants. This one woman, every week she would come back, she would ask one incredibly terse, precise question. That was it, 6 weeks till it seemed like she was having a stream entry. And other people seem to live in caves for decades without that necessarily seeming to occur. I think most of the factors that lead to stream entry being fast or slow are not things we can very easily tease out, right? There's 10 million factors and they're all interactive, which is a multiplication number on 10 million. One of the ones that stands out for me is the degree to which somebody gets the First Noble Truth. So if you're still looking for happiness in the outside world, your dedication to meditation, the nibbida is the Pali word for it, disenchantment, letting go of the outside. I think that works the best. I've seen this in two opposite groups. One was I was teaching meditation to people in a Medicaid clinic. So it was mentally ill people who were very poor. And they got this immediately, right? The idea that the outside world is not going to make you happy and you have very little control is like extremely obvious if you're in that situation. The other common route is the opposite, where you have enough financial stability, enough free time that you've tried everything, right? Drugs didn't turn out to do it, sex didn't turn out to do it, travel didn't turn out to do it. You kind of run out of options except looking internally. I'd heard a quote one time that American Buddhism was learning how to row harder and harder without untying the boat. I think this depth of understanding of the First Noble Truth, that what you're looking for is only to be found inside, helps you untie the boat.
Yeah. Ben?
So I'm wondering, so a lot of the stuff that I've ever heard anyone say about connections between meditation, science, and Western psychology are focused on the so-called evidence-based stuff, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, stuff that science people like. I don't really, that stuff I don't have as much experience with that stuff, but also I'm really curious to hear if, your spiritual experience and knowledge and teaching and whatever can bring to bear or compare and contrast with relational needs as understood in psychoanalysis, like Kohut, the needs for merger, mirroring, twinship, idealization, and as those fit in developmentally, something like Margaret Muller's individuation stuff, where kids sort of grow up and they're the developmental stages where they view themselves as really being the same as the parent, and then whatever parental figure, and then eventually they separate, but they're not totally separated, and so this kind of thing I've seen doesn't go away.
Would it be okay to ask for like a concise version of the question?
Yes.
In TLDR.
Okay, TLDR. I think there is a bit of a split between the spiritual landscape I've heard Buddhist teachers describe, and the idea in at least my head that there are very fundamental relational needs that people have that cannot be neglected in any meaningful way.
I think that's really important, Ben. I mean, something that Tucker's been saying all day is that the Sangha is the most important jewel, right? Other people. And I think that there's, again, one of the weird fetishes of Western Buddhism is that it's meditation that matters, whereas if we talk about actual Buddhism in its historical context for thousands of years, that's like not many people did that. People were doing a lot of other stuff in groups, rituals in groups, it was much more other people based. And so something that's happening now in America and Europe anyway is that I think there's a much more intersubjective, relational approach arising, and that's really, really good, right? There's a lot of stuff that when you're alone in your meditation room, you can bullshit yourself about, but it's really hard to do the minute you're talking to even one other person. And plus, you're right, there's a whole bunch of stuff about being a human being that doesn't even count when you're alone, right? We're really a group species. Our entire being the fullness of our being is other people. So I think that as every culture has to intake, and this has happened historically also forever, intakes Buddhism and changes it. One of the things we're going to learn to do is have this interpersonal, intersubjective, like group thing happen. That's very different than what we've been doing so far. And that's going to be really interesting, right? One of the pragmatic Dharma teachers, just to do the simplest version of this, right? Kenneth Folk invented the social noting, right?
So instead of just sitting alone, noting what's going on in my experience, we do it as a group with each other, back and forth. Right? It's that simple. But it's radically, weirdly different and interesting. What else?
So I had heard I heard the teaching before that awakening doesn't actually change your personality that much, that it makes it more distilled. And you know, that your weirdnesses beforehand get louder, not quieter. And if you hang out with Dharma teachers, they tend to be a pretty eccentric group of people. I guess what I've noticed is, as he folds his tattoo sleeves. Fit in perfectly in any suburb. So I'm like a 10 out of 10 on an extroversion scale, which is like, you know, convenient for doing public speaking. And I guess what I found in myself is the relational needs haven't changed, and the fucked up relational patterns haven't changed. So when I was younger, I would do this anxious attachment thing to people, where it was like, hey, let's lose any boundary between the two of us, such that like the fact that you live in a different house from me is kind of like distressing because it means that there's some separation, which I changed my mind. I hate you. I feel really threatened right now because we are the same person and maybe this isn't safe. No, wait, let's merge. When I was younger, I'd actually like do this to people, and you find the occasional weirdo who's into it, but you shouldn't be. And I find now, I still want to do that. Like I see the craving there. One change is mindfulness helps you see the ways in which you've been relationally fucked up, right? So you can say, oh, here's me wanting to, the movie's playing the same. Here's me just wanting to watch it and dive in and be one of the characters in the movie. I have a choice point now, you know? Before there was no choice point. So I think one thing is mindfulness helps you see the warps, see the issues. The other is, I was thinking I really liked the switch in how we're now looking at each other, because like the whole day, I don't know what Michael's thinking. Like I can't see him. Everybody else is looking at him, and I'm getting, does he like me still? And you know, those kind of old patterns you keep replaying. It's okay now, you know, like I notice I'm looking for positive social feedback, and you say, oh, that's a craving. You know, I would feel better if I had that. I can be okay without that. I can be okay feeling worse, even without getting it. So I think it helps you manage your stuff. But no, I think if you're an extrovert beforehand, there's often around second path things will get very weird. Like around second path is where emptiness looks really clear, form looks like a joke, form looks like an error that you used to make, that you conveniently and sometimes inconveniently no longer have to make. My experience has been my experience with both of myself and with students and peers has been when the dust settles after second path, especially if you're young and have hopefully a whole lot of time ahead of you to still be you, these same kind of cravings come back, but you can moderate them a lot better.
What else? Yeah.
Psychedelics came up earlier, but what about cannabis and meditation? Skillful, not skillful, keep them separate, areas where they can complement?
Just keep them separate. Like meditate, smoke afterwards, don't smoke beforehand.
Yeah, agreed. Chogyam Trungpa, who was apparently an alcoholic, used to
drank himself to death.
Who was definitely an alcoholic. I heard the story that one time he like rounded up all the joints in his place and threw them into the fireplace, which I guess is not the place to throw a joint. That would get everybody stoned.
He hated pot. He called it gray clouds.
Yeah, I think it's point is cultivating dullness and less sensory clarity. And the traditional Buddhist teaching is that has no place, right? So the fifth precept is do not do that. I think a lot of modern teachers would say what Michael's saying. Not never do that, but it has a role, but it's separate from meditation.
Just if you're a daily smoker, just do it in a different part of the day than your meditation. So you're going to be clearer and sharper and have brighter vipassana when you're not smoking.
Maybe one or two more, depending on how long they go for. You want to pick somebody? Stressful.
Gotcha.
Piggybacking on the relational question, which I loved your answer. Communication in romantic partnerships, and what skills in meditation are helpful? What have you found that you've been able to cultivate to communicate better?
I'm going to let Michael go first and then let Christina say anything he said that was false.
Christina will answer that question. I think, there's a lot of them, a lot of them. But the one that I think is crucial is the one that's crucial for a lot of other stuff. And we've been kind of alluding to it over and over and over and over and over again, which is that you have tolerance for discomfort. And so, if it's pain, you can sit with pain. If it's, mental stuff, you can sit with that. Relationally, the discomfort is, at the tiniest level, I want to talk over what you're saying, and instead you can sit with that discomfort. Or, something really big is coming up and I'm having a gigantic fucking reaction, but instead of doing that gigantic reaction instantly, hot off the press, with all the delusion and craziness and just stupidity of that, I can sit with the total discomfort at least a few seconds longer, and that few seconds weeds out at least all the worst of the craziness and the worst of the stupidity and the worst of the, whatever. And so the next response is saner. And so there's a thing of having enough equanimity to sit with discomfort so that you're a little bit kinder and saner. It's weird how important that is.
The one I've found is just what I was talking about in response to Ben's question. The ways in which I desperately need somebody to be a particular way, and therefore will get really upset when it turns out they're a different way, right? The ways in which your partner isn't who you need them to be. That's gotten a lot easier. I was talking about this concept earlier of agglomeration or sankhara, sticking things together that don't actually belong together. My neediness and your personality are both separate and kind of predictable sorts of things. And being able to see both of those separately, I really need something right now. You're not built to give me that thing. That really helps my mind relax around it. That would be where I would get foolishly confrontational in previous relationships, is demanding people do something that they're just not built for.
One more,
then we'll do a closing. Anybody we haven't heard from yet today who'd like to go out on the final question? Okay, Andre, you've had your hand up for a long time.
That's okay. So a lot of discussion happens around, pain or anxiety. But I really want to also talk about, nurturing positive aspects, like being able to make better decisions in your life, being in touch with reality in ways that make a difference for other people, things like that, and cultivating things like that with meditation.
That's retreat number 2 or day long number 2. It's a huge topic. It's really fascinating, right? And to me, this is present in all the different versions of Buddhism. In early Buddhism, the Sutrayana, the Theravada, you're doing the Brahma-viharas, right? So cultivating very specific mind states that are helpful, that help you, do stuff out in the world more effectively. By the time you get to Vajrayana, you're actively, because you notice the emptiness of the arising of self. You're not you do full self-replacement with deity selves and stuff like that, right? You can take they're not really archetypes, but archetypal type energies that have different qualities that you want to be able to manifest, and you're actually doing a practice to essentially practice being that way. And so given that menu gets gigantic, there's thousands of those you could do, in the West, we could just develop 1,000 more for all the things that didn't exist in medieval, Tibet or India or whatever. That gets to be a pretty interesting practice. Now, a lot of that is tied up with, imaginary entities and a lot of ritual and stuff, but there's no reason we can't strip that down and do, let's say, a more bare metal version of the same practice. To me, that's really fascinating. It's one of the things I'm developing pretty actively. Most of my teaching is about deconstruction, because in my mind, that's step one, but step two is reconstruction in these more positive, effective, creative, fun, pseudo selves.
I conveniently think the same thing, that the kind of person who has easy volitional access to positive emotion doesn't show up here, The kind of person who came to Dharma from a good mental place, who's here because they want to see deeper into the truth, I truly wouldn't run out of fingers telling you the number of students I've had that fit that model. People come here because they feel bad and they would like to feel better. It's what brings almost everyone to the Dharma. And the Buddha says, I teach two things, suffering and the end of suffering. So I think we focus on the negative more because that's what people come here to talk about. I've mentioned Brahma-vihara practices a few times, which from the Sutrayana tradition are the practices used to deliberately amp up the positive. But the route that I would use is precisely what Michael is describing. Take the thing apart, put it back together again, and now you know how it works. When you figure out how to deconstruct it, you can, it's become a trendy term recently, you can hack consciousness, you can hack the mind a lot better than you used to be able to. That last meditation we did, I thought, was a good description of what hacking looks like. When you get a good sense of what thoughts are you having and how do they affect your emotions, you can actually start volitionally changing that. But I think you need to start with the system, the mind system that you have. What is it currently like? And how do we start pulling it apart so we can figure out how it works? I think developing spontaneous positive emotion isn't an easy thing to do early on for the kind of person who's spontaneously attracted to the Dharma. The idea of Brahma-vihara practice is, and I learned it from a Christian teacher, practice kind of similar to Brahma-vihara, is that repetition of conscious intention causes the intention to arise unconsciously. So metta practice is the most common Brahma-vihara practice, and you repeat phrases of good intention for yourself and others, and you'll almost invariably find, if you do this for long enough, it starts showing up sometimes. Sharon Salzberg was my first teacher, and she tells the story about being on a metta retreat.
She's probably the West's metta master par excellence.
Yeah, she's the reason anyone's heard of metta. So she was on a metta retreat, and she knocked a glass off the counter and it broke, and the thought that shows up in her head is, "You're so clumsy, but I love you." where the hell did that come from? That's not what that usually sounds like. So I tend to think any kind of mantra practice, prayer practice, something where like, if you want to feel more grateful, just do a gratitude practice for 2 minutes twice a day. I learned this trick from the book Infinite Jest. It's supposedly an AA trick where you sleep with your sneakers under the bed. And so that means before bed, and then again in the morning when you get dressed, you will find yourself in a prostrate posture trying to get your shoes out from under your bed. And this way you won't forget to do a meditation. So I do that. I sleep with my shoes under my bed. And twice a day, I do a brief repetition of, a prayer or a repetition of intention for what I want. And like, it really works. It feels like magic when it works. The causality, on one hand, is obvious. You're repeating and it's working. But it's not temporally immediate. Like, you don't feel gratitude moments after the gratitude practice. You just do it twice a day for a couple minutes. And suddenly you start noticing, I'm really lucky to live here. This city's awesome. Like, plenty of people live in worse places and I get to live here. We have perilously little time left.
We're going to do like a short meditation and then have some announcements, and that's it. And I'm going to meditate on a cushion. Okay. Both of us at different heights. It's going to be interesting. Okay. This is a short one, so give it all you got. Don't hold back. Cut loose. Well, just like these that meditation, the day-longs always seem way too short.
Especially when people cut 30 minutes off of them, sorry.
Yeah. This is true. Thanks for coming, everybody. This, we did stream this all day, so you can go back and review any part of it you want on YouTube on my channel. So just look up Michael Taft on YouTube; it'll be there saved. I hope you guys donated to the center. Beyond, feel free to donate beyond the amount for the retreat because the center needs to keep going. There's tons of cool programs happening here all the time. Yes?
What's the amount for the retreat?
I have no idea.
How much does the retreat cost?
It's $80 to $160 suggested donation, or whatever you can give.
But, no one's turned away for lack of funds, so whatever works for you.
And no one's turned away for excess of funds.
Right.
Excellent point.
Yeah. So there's that. Tucker, do you have announcements about Tuckerdom?
Yeah, so if you want to study more with me, my website is meditatewithtucker.com. My name, tuckerpeck.com, redirects there. So I have a 10-day retreat I'm teaching on November 1st in Arizona. It's my favorite retreat center. It's really cheap and beautiful. The staff is great. So if you want to do a long retreat, come to Arizona. That will be fun. I teach weekend retreats about once a month in Coal Valley, which is pretty sweet. You can actually take the Muni to a retreat. There's one over Memorial Day that is probably sold out, but I will confess I don't actually know that answer. So if you go to my website, you can see all the things that I'm doing. I also have a Facebook group specifically for Bay Area events. It's facebook.com/sfmeditates. I work with this lady named June. We kind of run that local meditation stuff together, and she's way better with the internet than I am, and so she scored this awesome Facebook name of SF Meditates. So if you follow that Facebook page, you'll get updates on anything that I'm doing locally.
Talk about the sleep thing.
Drugfreesleep.com. Tell all your friends. Drugfreesleep.com is an insomnia course. It's a 5-week video course based on a treatment called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So normally you would have to go see a psychologist and get like a series of personalized sessions of that. But so you can do it with my video course. And actually she's not technically his wife, but she likes it when I say that. The wife of Jay Sanguinetti, the friend I was talking about, she does this kind of sleep coaching too. So if you want more than the video, there's a button you can click there, and then you get to talk to her.
After 5 weeks, you're guaranteed to have insomnia. It's awesome. On my end, as you know, come to SFDC and see me here on Thursday nights. And we're going to start doing a once-a-month Saturday night group called Death Sangha, where we dig into the meat of reality in a little more of a serious way than is sometimes the case. That's going to be fun. That starts on June 22nd. Got a retreat coming up in Colorado in early June. So that I'm teaching together with my friend Nataraja Kallio, who is both a highly advanced meditator and also runs America's only degreed yoga program. So we'll be doing some very, yoga for all bodies kind of thing, like movement stuff, but very doable. And also quite a bit of meditation. So that's in the Rockies. And then the next retreat after that I've got lined up, although I'm hoping to have some in between, will be at the end of August, early September, up in British Columbia at a retreat center there for 6 days. That's like shut up and meditate kind of retreat in the rainforest on an island in the ocean. So it's awesome. And of course, there's the Deconstructing Yourself podcast and lots and lots and lots of other resources. So. And
we should really do this again sometime.
Part 2.
So Yeah, keep an eye on our various internet channels and the SFDC Facebook page. And this is pretty fun. And we're like a couple minutes over, and I definitely have a day's worth of more things I couldn't tell you about. So we'll do this again.
Then Genevieve or whoever, do we have SFDCs? Let's aim this at Suzanne.
If you must. First of all, thank you so much, Tucker and Michael. That was utterly fascinating and completely engaging, and I personally loved being here today, so thank you. And thank you to all of you who were here today. And whether this is your first time here or you've been here before, either for a day long or for Michael's class or for anything else, something that you guys mentioned several times really just kept resonating with me, and that is about the third, about the Sangha. And I personally have derived so much benefit from being a part of this Sangha. And if you're here today, you are the Sangha. You are part of the Sangha. So we welcome you here, and I really encourage all of you to come back for any of the other programming that we have. Michael's always here on Thursday nights, so amazing, awesome. And I attended his one-day death meditation retreat, and it was amazing. So I cannot recommend highly enough to come be part of the Death Sangha. Sounds like a cult almost, but
we will wear makeup.
Yeah. I like that idea. So thank you again for coming out, and Katie, who's on the SF Dharma Collective board, asked me to remind everyone that if you'd like to give, you can not only give monthly through our subscription page at sfdharmacollective.org, but you can also use Venmo and PayPal, like here, now, anytime. If you happen to be streaming, you're at home, you're streaming Michael, and he does stream his video out on Thursday nights. Feel free to give then. Feel free to give anytime, because it all goes to keep the center going. We're completely volunteer run and volunteer-led, student-led. So thank you for coming today. And one extra bonus thing, the artist of a lot of these prints that you see throughout the center here happens to be here, Christina Lazar, and she will double sign if you are interested in picking one of those up and taking them home and making them your own. She will double sign that for you. She will not take her pants off and sign those for you though. I know. She needs those. So thanks for coming out tonight, guys. Really appreciate it.
One other quick thing, just because I think this audience would really be interested in coming back. Psychedelic Sangha every month on Saturdays. I think it's usually the third Saturday. And if you were here for the second one and happened to get to encounter Mike Crowley as the guest speaker, who really just entranced all of us, he's going to be coming back and doing some Friday nights once a month starting in May, and also has an upcoming day long. And the dates for those are just getting set now. So keep an eye on our website because we have a lot of amazing stuff going on.
Yeah, the Psychedelic Sangha is like unique in the world and run by the unique in all worlds, Eric Davis. So, teaches of the Paisley Gate. So check it out if you're interested in that.
The next one's May 11th.
Thanks so much
Thanks,
for
everybody.
coming to our workshop.